Hi, Bella. Objective morality. Yeah, I follow Amendum. I subscribe to his channel. I watch his videos. I haven't really engaged him directly because I don't really feel like he's interested in conversation. Um, I've known people like him who desire, and I think his silliness, his ridiculous ideas, they come from a good place. He wants to see the world become something better. He wants us to evolve. But I find it curious that evolution somehow means that we don't include our emotions in our rational take on the world. Because you're right, it is a matter of taking it all into account and pulling back, and that's not being objective. That is being rational. But I think that the way that he is discussing these things is sort of typical of how we're raised. Boys here are raised to be men who are precise and analytical. And I'm making a large generalization here, and certainly there are exceptions. But we're raised to be analytical and precise and cold and somewhat emotionless. We're taught to sort of bury our emotions, except for anger, because anger is justifiable. But it's kind of silly. And one of the things that, like when I teach my classes, one of the things that I encourage my students to do, particularly when I'm teaching argument, or how to write effective arguments, or how to make effective arguments. One of the things that I encourage them to do is to assume that objectivity is a myth. To assume that we cannot be objective. Now, I take for granted that they have a certain notion of what that word means. And because I think it is impossible for us to be objective. We cannot separate ourselves from our emotions. We can pull back and look and analyze. But we cannot separate ourselves from our emotions as much as we would like to. That doesn't mean that we are fully controlled by our emotions, but that does mean that we can't just we're not computers. We weren't built. We aren't evolution didn't make us that way. We have emotions, and they form our world. They form our perceptions of the world. And most of the time, I think when people hide behind objectivity, really they're just trying to justify their own subjective viewpoint. And everyone does this. Everyone does this. But I think it's interesting that, because I personally see it as a point of evolution. All of the arts have, in a sense, evolved into taking emotions into account, into the rational process, into taking and processing. Keats called this negative capability. Taking all the emotions of life, all the stuff, the experience of life, including those events beyond our control and the emotions that we have in understanding those events, and turning it into something else, making it art. And writing has evolved. Painting has evolved, sculpture, all the forms of the arts, acting, all these things have evolved to incorporate our emotions as part of the process. But yet we're still bent as a society on being objective. And I think that this is the thing that's holding us back. This is one of the things that is keeping us as humans from evolving into the next thing that we could become, because we're still denying our feelings. And as long as we can claim we're being objective, we can then claim anything. And I think that your association, your example of Hitler is very apt, because he believed he was being objective. He was looking at the world as he saw it after being defeated in World War I, and he chose to blame the Jews for everything. And that was to him being objective. The final solution was not, genocide to him. It was not Holocaust to him. It was an objective mathematical solution for him. And we tend to forget that in the scope of history, and we say, well, we'll never behave that way. We could never be Hitler. I'm sure that George Bush says that on a fairly regular basis, that he's certainly never as bad as Hitler. But it kind of, I think it's interesting that we have, for some reason, decided that it's okay to talk about emotions and be irrational, but it's not okay to look at emotions as a part of the rational construct, as a part of the things that we consider when we pull back and look at things. Because people who know themselves, who are self-aware, are able to do that. And I think, artists and writers are able to do that because we have to be self-aware. We must be. We have to be, or the work is shit. And I think that it's sad, that people still aren't comfortable. And I'm not talking about touchy-feely, cry, weepy shit, because I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big crier. I haven't cried in a long time. But I do feel things, and I do write about my emotions. But my writing is not also, like just me venting. It's not therapy. I'm rambling, but you get what I'm saying here. I think that when people are being objective, and it's such a masculine perspective, isn't it? All the people who want to be objective, manly, precise, looking at the world, and some of the criticisms I think that I've seen of you in this vein of discussion, I think are sort of picking on you, or sort of, because you're a woman, that somehow you're being necessarily irrational. I see that as an undertone in a lot of the textual comments, and I find that very interesting and very telling about how little we've progressed. Objectivity, the great myth of the ages. And the thing is, they think they're being scientific. They think they're being precise. Nowhere in Descartes did he talk about emotions being a bad thing. Darwin never talked about emotions being a bad thing. Perspective is everything in sciences. And yeah, you have to be able to pull yourself back and be rational, but at the same time, you have to understand where you're coming from. And I think that people like Amendum, who call for this objective morality, are just calling for it because that way they can sort of justify their own irrationality. Because objectivity can be very irrational, like Hitler. Because there's nothing rational in a larger sense about what he did, what he instigated. So, and there's really nothing rational about what George Bush is doing and what he's instigated in the world. There's nothing rational about any of it. So, that's my 2 cents. I hope things are going well. And I'm going to post my other video. So anyway, bye.